But you get the point, right? That's why there's this saying a prosecutor
wait.
can get a grand jury to indict a ham sandwich.
I do need to say there is a difference though between somebody getting prosecuted off of, say, like smoking a joint and mislabeling $130,000 in funds of company money in order to be allocated for the prostitute you're trying to pay off while running for president. So it's been, I think, like 3-4 months since we last had a conversation. Michael, how have you been since then? How's the last 4 months treated you?
I've been okay. I'm just gonna give you a generic, boring answer now because it's almost like a. This is one of these sort of perfunctory etiquette type introduction things. Yeah, I've been good. I mean, I've been keeping busy. I've been basically, I think, maintaining a decent standard of life. Although people who disagree with me on the internet might not agree. How about you?
I'm good. I'm back overseas, so I'm doing the work that I wanted to be doing. Where
are you now?
I'm in Kiev. I'm the Kiev Oblast, not the city of Kiev, but in the Kiev Oblast at the moment.
Okay. Can you give me a sense of where you are, like more precisely in relation to Kiev, or do you want to maintain OPSEC?
I'm like a few hours outside of the city. Like I'm very close to the city. I could get into the city in like an hour or two, probably.
A few hours outside the city you consider close?
Yeah, I'm a Yank, so we used to take 7-hour drives to West Virginia when I was a kid to visit my great grandparents. So, and not to mention, like, a lot of the traveling I've done in this country is like 8, 10, 11, 12 hours in a row. So, like, yeah, plus I got to give you a range. I can't tell you exactly, I'm these many minutes outside the city and this direction. Sure. Yeah, just asking to get killed.
I guess maybe I'm sort of biased by having grown up in northern New Jersey, where like I could measure where stuff was in relation to how long it takes to get into Manhattan. And so like I was like a half hour out by bus from Manhattan, so that's kind of like my baseline for judging these things. Did you pick where you are now for any particular reason? I mean, I'm not trying to pry. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I understand.
Why are you where you are?
I got you. You gotta get that information to Putin somehow. But no, it's
yeah, I have him on speed dial.
I'm in this area because I like to hang out here. It's a good place for me to decompress. I do some of my best writing in this location. It's pretty renewable where I'm located. So let's say there's a massive power outage, we have batteries, so I can still get some work done. I have friends in this area and I enjoy hanging out with them when I'm not out there like working. But I have an apartment in Kiev, and I spend a lot of my time there as well. So it's usually, if I'm not out filming in one of the major cities like Kharkiv somewhere, I'm usually in the general Kiev area. It's like the perfect place to be if you had to go anywhere in a moment's notice, because there's like trains in almost every direction. There's routes in almost every direction.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. I spent much of the past couple months since we last spoke abroad as well, but not in Ukraine. In the UK and in Germany. So, yeah. But now I'm back in the US now.
Germany was okay. The internet was terrible. I have better internet here than I did when I was in Germany. When I was in central Germany, I had just the worst service. I don't know what it is. I've heard...
really?
Yeah, I don't know what it was. I had better service.
What, you mean like at hotels or restaurants and things, or
no? Like
where were you?
I actually stayed with some YouTuber friends, and they had some bad internet, and they're YouTubers. Their job is being online, having good internet. In Germany, it was just very bad. My best internet connection I've had while in Europe has consistently been in Ukraine, and that's really weird to think about. There's a lot more competition in Ukraine. A lot of the providers have been kind of like. There's a ton of different providers, which gave it a lot of flexibility when Russia invaded, because it wasn't just you take out 1 or 2 providers. Where you somewhere like Australia, you've got like 1 or 2 providers, so all the service is shit and you can't go anywhere else because you're kind of like held hostage. When Ukraine, there's a lot of providers. I think maybe that might be part of it. I think.
Well, where I am right now in Jersey City, there's literally only 1 provider available. I wish I could get a different provider other than the stupid Comcast, because even though I pay for the premium speed, it still is not especially reliable, and I would definitely opt for a different service if I could, but there's none available because of like the monopolistic like utility structure in this part of New Jersey.
So I wanted to get into the politics a bit. So Before we get into anything that I disagree with you on, I want to talk.
Oh, and by the way, let's stipulate off the top that we both agreed that we're not going to go like 5+ hours.
Yes,
like we did last time, because that's just unreasonable by anybody's.
Yeah, it was very
so let's keep
long.
it like, hour and a half, something around that range if possible.
Yeah. I've already told you, like, I will not. I have did a hard lock against going anywhere past 2 hours. So something before that at the bare minimum. So I wanted to open up by asking you about some recent events. Trump might do a perp walk, and that's pretty crazy to like kind of comprehend the idea of Donald Trump doing a perp walk. We were all kind of scared going into Tuesday of exactly what would happen. We were either scared, excited, nervous, a million different feelings, and then it just didn't happen. And so now there's questions of, oh, has it been delayed? How long is it going to take? Is it ever actually going to happen? Tuesday was given to us by Donald Trump, of course. It wasn't like the courts came out and said, we will arrest him Tuesday. First off, do you think it's going to happen? And my bigger question to you, this is the one I really want an in-depth answer to. What do you think? How do you think this will affect Donald Trump if he's going to be facing these type of legal problems or possible detainment over criminal activity possibly committed?
Well, I don't know if it's going to happen. I mean, maybe that's a overly sort of simplistic or boring answer.
It's a good answer.
Yeah, but so much of media oxygen is sucked up by people just speculating wildly that I've developed this natural aversion to really indulging in it. Yeah, Trump did put out that notice that suggested, I don't know, was it like explicitly definitive that he said, I will no ifs, ands, or buts be arrested on Tuesday?
He didn't say like no ifs, ands, or buts, but he said that he was going to get arrested on Tuesday. That's what he said. I
saw the post. I don't remember the exact wording, but I think
what I thought he looked at it and he was like, oh, he heard from somebody else that the earliest he could get arrested is Tuesday, and then he said, I'm going to get arrested Tuesday. Like I imagine he maybe like fumbled on that or something.
Yeah, it's impossible to say. I was actually on a Twitter Spaces. I was invited to participate in a Twitter Spaces session last night where this was the topic, and one of the points that I raised, and I sort of just came up with this on the fly because frankly I haven't devoted that much mental energy to thinking about Donald Trump's various legal issues or snafus, because there's sort of, at least from my perspective, a fatigue around the minutia of kind of frenzied prognostication of what avenue or what sort of mechanism will lead to Trump finally landing in the big house, because his term as president was dominated by that. That was mostly around the Mueller investigation, but there were also other kind of ancillary investigations that just allowed people who are, online obsessives to kind of let their entire lives be consumed by this sort of manic craving for Donald Trump to be put in handcuffs and perp walked into prison or something. And it just sort of gets tedious eventually. And the tedium here, anyway, for me, is that if you get to the substance of what the potential charge would be, it derives apparently from the whole Stormy Daniels matter, which is, in the grand scheme of things, fairly trivial, I would say. And I'm not advocating that presidents, as a matter of principle, be immunized from the criminal justice system, or that they shouldn't be subject to criminal punishment if they do violate the law. I wouldn't make a blanket rule out of that, but it still is the case, I sort of wager, that if for the first time in American history, since 1789, a U.S. president is going to be indicted and hauled into court and arraigned and so forth, then that is a bit of a watershed event, or it's at least a norm-breaker event. And so with that in mind, you would think that the substance of a charge that is levied against a president and that would then bring about this norm-breaking circumstance, that the substance would be of enough weight or enough gravity that it would like warrant it just in kind of a broader political sense. Forget the technical question of whether he violated the law, because like lots of people can violate the law for lots of reasons. Bill Clinton probably could have been criminally charged with perjury after his testimony in the Paula Jones and Monica Lewinsky affair, but nobody seriously suggested that he ought to be criminally investigated and charged after he left office in 2000. And I think there's probably legitimate reason for why that wasn't seen as a realistic proposition, because it just would have come with a certain level of tumult and consternation, just given his position as a former president, that's something that ought to be kind of taken into consideration. So if it does happen, and I don't know that it will, I mean, it seems like there's a lot of rumors and leaks, and again, it's largely just speculation, but let's say it does happen. I think it would have been something like an abdication of a duty that people in public office have, and especially people who wield the prosecutorial powers of the state have, to exercise discretion in a manner that is sort of in accord with civic health. Because, you know, the way that I put it last night is I could see it being worthwhile and justified to break the taboo and charge Trump if he actually had committed the crime of treasonously colluding with Russia, or if he had committed the crime and it could be proven beyond a reasonable doubt, and like the constitutional questions were sorted out, of inciting an insurrection, like if that were the charge. But if it's something where they have to concoct, which is apparently the case, at least based on suggestions I've seen, although nothing's been proven, but if they ultimately do charge Trump by concocting a brand new legal theory that borrows from federal election law and transports it into state law in New York somehow, and then sort of postulates this, again, sort of new convoluted theory as to how that makes Trump criminally liable, I do think it's probably worth being skeptical of the motive there and the prudence of that decision.
So I guess, like, when I look at this, and again, it wouldn't be, because it's almost certain that he at the very least committed a misdemeanor when it comes to paying off Stormy Daniels with $130,000. But the whole perp walk getting arrested, that doesn't usually happen with misdemeanors. That's why they're misdemeanors. What you're talking about is it being elevated possibly into like campaign finance fraud, the idea that this is involved in a larger scandal of something, whether that would have to be proven in court. The thing that gets me about this, and when I'm talking about
very quickly though, why is it obvious to you that he committed a misdemeanor?
Because if he took $130,000 and he paid off Stormy Daniels through the subsidiary to not talk publicly about what she did, that is a crime. He is using
paying hush money unto itself is not a crime.
But he's paying it through a subsidiary using company funds. That would be like if I took if I worked at McDonald's and I used $130,000 McDonald's money to like pay off some hooker that I plowed to not tell them that I'm into like some weird kinky stuff, that would be illegal. That's different than campaign.
I'm not sure about that, but you know, whatever. It doesn't really matter.
Wait, you don't know if it's illegal if I was to take $130,000 out of McDonald's, the place that I work, and then like pay off a hooker to not?
Oh, out of the place that you work. Okay, yeah, well, that would be theft. I mean, that wouldn't be illegal because of you using the money to make a hush a payment. It was because you stole the money.
Well, it's okay. What I'm saying is like money that is used for that. But yeah, it's okay. Putting all this, this is all next to my bigger point that I want to make. My bigger point is I agree with you that this is very much not the worst thing that Trump has done. It's not even like in the top, like probably 20 worst things Trump has done. The worst thing that, in my opinion, Trump did was when he called the Georgian campaign officials to try to ask them to find the votes so he would win an election. That seemed like unbelievably immoral. That seemed like something that should have come with real legal repercussions to make sure that somebody doesn't do that in the future. Because if it becomes a tradition that presidents just start calling campaign officials across the country, some of which might have loyalties to him, some of which might not have loyalties to him, in order to quote unquote find the votes to make them win, saying the exact amount of votes necessary to win, that is something that can start a real dangerous process that kind of like degrades the foundation of our democracy, which I know is like a buzzword, but I do believe that in that instance. That, in my opinion, is much worse than this. But I could see this ending up a little bit like Al Capone. What they got Al Capone for wasn't the murdering, wasn't the butchering, wasn't the kidnapping, wasn't the illegal activity or the smuggling or the illegal gambling, wasn't any of that stuff, which was much, 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 much worse than what they actually got him on, which was tax evasion. It's what they could get the most evidence for. It's what was the easiest case to get through. There's a lot of instances in the legal system where somebody's done a whole host of horrific crimes, but there's one that they know they could get him on. And it's probably better to do the thing they know they can get him on than do all the stuff that they don't know for sure they can get him on, even if they're pretty positive that he committed the crime, but they couldn't necessarily prove it in a court of law. And I kind of see it like that. That's how I kind of view the situation, where I know he's committed all these other crimes, and this is probably one of the most minor ones, but they also couldn't get him on all the other crimes.
Right, but if you were to support or you were to be pleased by the bringing of charges against Donald Trump on what even you admit, I'm not saying you specifically here, one, if one admits that the charges ultimately brought against Donald Trump are ultimately about a trivial matter, but nonetheless they're warranted to bring against him because he's committed so many other crimes, and like Al Capone, even if you can't prove his worst misdeeds in court beyond a reasonable doubt, it's reasonable to want to find something that you can just pin on him, even if it doesn't rise to the level in terms of wrongdoing and other stuff. But that's like a misuse of the legal.
I'm not saying that they. I'm not saying.
Rightly be seen as a misuse of the criminal justice.
I don't think they should go after him harder because of all the other stuff he did in this instance. I just think that this is somebody who is so awash of probably illegal or criminal or immoral activity, but this is the thing that they actually have for it. Now, I don't think that they should be like, okay, we couldn't get him all this other stuff, so let's get him super hard on this one. That would be immoral. That would be wrong. But I do think that this is just the thing that they could actually find on him. It's not that, oh, look, he committed all these other things, let's bring him to trial on this. It could be that he did all these things, we just can't get him on this. And this is the thing that he did get, that they found, and that's why he's finding this legal trouble now. I mean, there's like multiple different legal proceedings ongoing, both civil and otherwise, against Donald Trump at this moment. It could have been any number of crimes that ended up just eventually catching up with him, which tends to happen with people who act like oligarchs all the time, which is what I would say after spending some time in Ukraine and talking to people how oligarchs acted. He reminds me a lot of actually Ukrainian style Eastern European oligarchs. I'm more surprised that it took so long for something to catch up with him. I don't know if it's going to lead to him actually having to go through a perp walk, but all I'm trying to express is this: if somebody's this awash in this type of activity, you're going to get him eventually on something.
Think about the implications of that. Person A, forget Trump, any citizen, Joe Sixpack, is seen to have a long record of engaging in what is seen by some as immoral behavior, is of poor character, is somebody that it's believed ought to have punishment come his way, whatever the precise reason. So then people run for office, get elected into a prosecutorial role, and decide that they agree that they're going to home in on Joe's six-pack and just find something that they can charge him with, not because the wrongdoing just came to their attention as a matter of ordinary gathering of facts and standard sort of conduct of their office, but because they made a choice that this person uniquely deserved to have unusually high scrutiny placed upon him because of his alleged, wrongful behavior in the past. That's a sort of a perversion of justice, or it would be called a perversion of justice in lots of other contexts, because, think about how this apparently came about. My understanding is, and I covered Letitia James fairly extensively for other reasons, but Letitia James, who's the Attorney General of New York, when she first ran for that office in 2018, campaigned on a specific, explicit, unambiguous pledge that if elected, she was going to investigate Donald Trump. I'm not mischaracterizing it. I'm not exaggerating it. You can go find the tweets. You can go find the campaign commercials. It's out there. That's what she explicitly pledged to do if elected. And she followed through on the pledge. She initiated, primarily a civil investigation against Trump Organization, but it also resulted in a criminal charge against the CFO of the Trump Organization. I think Alan Weisselberg is his name. And it could have potentially impinged on Donald Trump personally if the facts led to that determination, at least as the Attorney General's office saw it. And Alvin Bragg was her chief deputy.
This is a separate.
Alvin Bragg was her chief deputy. No. But listen, Alvin Bragg was her chief deputy. So it's kind of a ad hoc way to pursue criminal justice that I think, if extended out, word and made into a more general principle, could sort of fly in the face of what we would have come to expect of as the sort of expectations of and norms around how the law is used for its most punitive purpose, which is to throw people in prison.
Okay, so my question was, is the name you're saying the same person involved with this specific case? That was my question I was trying to get across. I just wanted to... Or is this separate
Alvin Bragg, who's the Manhattan District Attorney.
Gotcha. Okay.
Who's overseeing the potential arrest around the Stormy Daniels stuff.
So
he previously, before 2021, was the chief deputy of Letitia James in the Attorney General's office in New York State.
Gotcha. So I guess the first thing I would have to say, and this isn't a justification, but this is just like something I would have to bring up. It's like bringing up Andrew Tate mentioning, I'm moving to Romania so I can just pay off the cops. Then he gets arrested by the Romanian police. Having Donald Trump, one of the major things that was like one of his campaign points being lock her up, lock her up, lock her up. And being there a lot of just like free and open communication of the idea that all of my political opponents are criminals and under good circumstances, they would be locked up. And actually, I will lock her up, which was something he was talking about in 2016. Now he's trying to run for president again. And now there's a chance that he gets locked up. And he was going out of his way also while he was in office, definitely during the Ukraine phone call, to try to find the misgivings or misdeeds of the previous administration with Joe Biden in reference to Ukraine, trying to dig it up so he could either A, throw the book on Joe Biden, or B, use this during his campaign in 2020 so he could win. And so let's for a moment say that what you're saying is completely true, and this was all started purely because the person behind this operation was just like an anti-Trump fanatic. This does also feel like some karmic justice from the hand of God a little bit, considering Trump's past actions, right?
Well, I'm always going to be wary of the law being deployed, especially, again, the punitive arm of the law being deployed for something called karmic justice.
Well, I'm not saying that it's karmic justice. I didn't say that.
Sort of
I didn't.
Separate and apart from the. No. I didn't say it.
Okay.
But even if you're satisfied with this result on account of something that resembles what you might think of as karmic justice, or again, not you in particular, I'm not trying to personalize it. Again, the unwelcome or the unwelcome implications of that, I think, are still present. Because let's stipulate that Trump is guilty himself of also setting about to pervert the impartial application of criminal law in various ways, whether it was ginning up lock me up chance or by, putting pressure on the Justice Department to do various things that were maybe in his political interest when he was in office as president. Somebody might be able to quibble with the idea that those actually were perversions of justice, but let's just stipulate that they were. The idea that then one ought to advocate for additional perversion of justice just to get retribution on Trump, I think, in a way, just amplifies the problem that you're saying you were so concerned about when Trump did it. If anything, the way to counter your perceptions of Trump perverting justice would be to maintain propriety in terms of how the law is applied, not to sink to the level of Trump and just replicate what you were condemning him for doing.
I do agree that if it is true that this is solely being done because Trump's a Republican, we don't want him to win, so therefore we're investigating him. If that's the main force behind this, I do disagree with it. But it's also impossible for me to feel a shred of sympathy for somebody who is trying to do that exact thing. We know almost for certain when it came to the conversation he was having with Zelensky and trying to leverage aid in order to get information on his political opponents, either to start an investigation, criminal investigation, whatever Hunter Biden did, or to try to use it politically. It's impossible for me to find any sympathy in my heart. Now, moving on from that to specifically,
but just very quickly, and then we can wrap up. Like nothing I've said about the potential potential misgivings about this stem from my saying that it's necessary for you or anybody else to extend sympathy to Donald Trump.
Of course, I didn't say that.
That's not what
I know. I'm explaining my point.
Yeah.
So on to the second point. I would need to have it shown to me that this investigation was launched because of political distaste for Trump, outside of the idea that there was a genuine interest from the state of New York in investigating Donald Trump's criminal behavior when it comes to either mislabeling funds that were then used to pay off prostitutes or any other illegal activities that he's being investigated for in various courts in various parts of the different country at various points of times. Because I can't actually think of a single period of time in the last few years where Donald Trump was not under investigation for something. And so for me, until that is shown for me, this is not a case that I'd be willing to say to throw out or not. And even if it is the case that this did happen, that also doesn't remove from the idea that he's still engaged in criminal behavior. And so until that is shown for me, it's very hard for me to get like super angry about this case. So when we talk about this person who was running on "I will investigate Trump," was she saying that he did this, and this crime, and therefore, as a state of New York, we should investigate him? Or was she like, we need to stop this racist from being reelected, let's investigate him? It's going to be very hard to read somebody's intent, definitely on the campaign trail, if they're specifically pointing out the misdoings and then saying we should investigate it. Because let's say there was a Republican in my state that committed a crime and I was running for DA and he wasn't being prosecuted for it. Even if I was running as a Democrat, I still I would say on the campaign trail, yeah, we should go after the guy who committed the crime. We shouldn't let him get away with it.
Well, if you said that on the campaign trail, then that would be fodder for the person who you're saying ought to be prosecuted, allies, or even that person himself, to impugn your motive or to cast doubt on the impartiality with which you approached your investigation.
Why?
Letitia James in 2018, I mean, I can't give you I don't have the exact quotes in front of me, but she would say stuff along the lines of, I'm going to hold Trump accountable, and that's what I'm going to do with the powers of my office. If elected, hold Trump accountable, meaning, set the gears in motion to bring a charge of some sort against Trump. So she campaigned on a pledge to do that. And I think, that's dubious as to whether that's a proper course of action for any prosecutor to take, because bear in mind, prosecutors, especially in the United States, have a huge amount of discretionary authority. If you or I were subject to unyielding 24/7 legal scrutiny, there's probably a decent chance, given how massive the criminal code is on a federal, state, local level, that an enterprising prosecutor could figure out a way to charge you or I with something. Now, maybe I'm more morally blemished than you, so they could charge me a bit easier. But you get the point, right? That's why there's this saying,
I do need to say, there is a difference, though, between somebody getting prosecuted off of, say, like smoking a joint and mislabeling $130,000 in funds of company money in order to be allocated for the prostitute you're trying to pay off while running for president, which could possibly even spiral into a campaign laws, violations of campaign law. So that's there is a difference, and I think one is a serious situation that should be dealt with.
There's a difference between those potential charges, right? I'm not equating somebody who gets charged with smoking a joint with somebody who commits, this sort of elaborate campaign finance violation. The point is, though, that on principle, an enterprising prosecutor, if they were motivated to do so, whether for political reasons, whether for sort of career aspirational reasons, whatever the reason, if they homed in on Citizen A for an extended period of time with the intent of eventually furnishing a fact pattern that could then lead to an indictment, they could almost certainly do so. Again, that's why there's this saying, a prosecutor could get a grand jury to indict a ham sandwich, which is why, not to say that whatever Trump might be charged with in terms of the Stormy Daniels thing would be equivalent in its sort of triviality to a ham sandwich getting indicted. The point is that given the massive discretion that a prosecutor has in terms of how he or she carries out their office, then it is necessary to scrutinize how they allocate their resources. What do they choose to focus on or not focus on? It's a political office. I mean, it's probably a fault, or it could be argued to be a fault of the American system, that in lots of jurisdictions, you do actually have to be a politician to get into one of these prosecutorial roles, because you got to get elected. But in New York anyway, and in this particular situation, the DA is a politician And so that just invites or even obligates outside observers to exercise some due skepticism in sort of evaluating how it is that they came to this end result. Because as I understand it, what are the potential reasons why this arrest might be happening now, or why the indictment might be coming down now or soon, is because they could be running up against a statute of limitations. So if all of a sudden it was decided that they have to kind of scramble and come up with a last minute theory as to how Trump can be charged for these offenses before the wall of the statute of limitations arrives and they're no longer able to do so, then, you know, you have to ask, okay, so why are they scrambling to get a charge in before that happens? I mean, if they had 5 years to conduct a measured investigation that led wherever the facts led, then you wouldn't think it would be necessary to all of a sudden have to make this last minute mad dash to put together the facts. And if they are doing that, then, you know, you could see why they might have some sort of political rationale behind it, given that Trump, you know, only declared officially that he's running for president in 2024 last November.
Well, wasn't this I could have sworn that a lot of these events, I would have to ask, was this investigation going on before he announced he was running for president? And also, let's be clear, we all knew Trump was running for president for like the last 2 years, probably. It was very clear. He was on the campaign trail. Every single time they asked him why you're running for president, he's like, I mean, maybe somebody really cool is going to run for president. Don't know who that'll be, right? He was, so if this would have been introduced in the last 2 to 3 years, anybody could have said politically motivated, right? Hell, if anybody could have said for the last 4, 5, 6, 7 years, somebody could have said politically motivated, because that's how long he's really been involved in politics. And ever since then, he's been involved in nonstop scandal. And I have to ask this, because if it was 1930 and I get into office, right, and I am the prosecutor.
Here we go. The 1930 analogies are
trust me,
already upon us.
Yeah, here it is. It's 1930, and I'm working to try look at the crimes that are hurting my community. And I see this guy Al Capone. He's going around committing all these crimes, killing all these people, doing all these bad things. Right? Obviously, I don't think Donald Trump and Al Capone are the same person, but obviously, when it comes to like severity of the crime, but I'm running for DA, and I say I will hold Al Capone to account, unlike these other DAs who refuse to hold him to account. Would that be moral or immoral for me to declare that and then get into office and then look into Al Capone to see if there's any crimes that he committed that he could be found guilty on?
Well, first of all, there's been investigatory activity happening in the Manhattan District Attorney's Office as relates to this case or this matter for a number of years. It's not just in the past couple months that all of a sudden Alvin Bragg decided that they had to get to the bottom of the Stormy Daniels affair. It had been investigated, as I understand it, at the federal level, and charges were not thought to be warranted. And so for it not to be thought that charges are warranted at the state level, which has much less that obviously to do with campaign finance law in terms of, you know, federal elections, that sort of, it stands to reason there could be some sort of overarching explanation as to why they felt that they had to, again, do a mad rush to bring these charges before they run up against the wall of the statute of limitations. So, of course, Trump...
That would have to be
proven
first,
there would have been
right?
a huge... Of course, there would have been a massive longing on the part of
Can I just
lots
get a clarification
liberals
that
who
would
hate
have
Trump
to be
to charge
proven
him,
first?
even if he wasn't running again.
Could I get that clarification?
It's not unreasonable to speculate that there could be extra impetus behind...
Michael, I want to make sure we only spend so much time on this because we have a bunch of other things we need to talk about. So I just wanted to ask a clarifying question. You want to clarify that would first have to be proven, though. It would have to be proven that they're just making a mad dash because they want to put this guy behind bars because he's the political opponent. This would have to be proven in a court of law, because all of this is depending upon the intent you read out of statements, which, as we both know, can easily be misinterpreted. As we both, being people who have had our statements misinterpreted in the past, this would have to be proven.
Well, I mean, there's no question of misinterpretation when it comes to what Letitia James campaigned on in 2018. And again, Alvin Bragg was her chief deputy when she initiated...
Motivations could be misinterpreted.
Well, I mean, she said what her motivation was. She campaigned on what she said was her motivation.
Holding Donald Trump accountable. But it's different between I'm going to hold Donald Trump accountable because he's a racist Republican, or I'm going to hold Donald Trump accountable because he's a fucking criminal. These are two very different statements.
Well, no, but she said Trump needs to be held accountable. Therefore, once I'm in this office, I will use my powers
but the motivations
as Attorney
behind
General to hold him accountable by charging him, finding something to charge him criminally with.
Did she said that I'm just going to go out there and look for something to charge Donald Trump with. I'm just going to go out there and I'm going to find something.
She wouldn't have put it in those blasé of terms.
Okay, but because earlier it sounded
if somebody's running for Attorney General and they say I want to get in power so I can hold this person accountable. What do you think they're promising to do there? Why are they running for Attorney General?
To hold a criminal accountable. It could be.
For what method?
What do you mean for what method? You mean for what crime?
How would they hold them accountable?
By
criminally, right? Through the law.
Yeah, you would hold them through the law. So you'd look at their crimes and be like, help, did he commit this crime? And then hold them account to this crime. But the difference that I'm finding with you is I'm saying that it could be that because you're bringing information to my attention here. It could be that this is politically motivated. The reason she's doing this is primarily motivated by making sure that Donald Trump isn't able to run and become president in 2024. That could be the motivation, but we would need evidence for that because an equally honest interpretation of the facts could be here. I would even say more so would be that she's saying, I want to hold this criminal who has acted criminally in our city to account for being a criminal where other DAs won't, just like somebody would with a gang leader or somebody involved in any other number of activities that could be harmful to the community.
But if you're a prosecutor and on day one, with a blank slate, you say to yourself, I want to hold this criminal accountable, therefore I'm going to investigate him and find out what crimes he committed, then you're prejudging his guilt, right? You're not embarking on an impartial fact-finding process. You're already saying that the person needs to be charged with a crime because he's a criminal.
That's not true. No, wait. You could make an honest interpretation of the facts that were available from Donald Trump's behavior up until this point and interpreting criminality very easily. I've already done it with the Georgia example, but like you said, there's discretion when it comes to the prosecutor. So this prosecutor has different discretion than the person before them. Right? The DA has different discretion than the person before them. And so their discretion is different. And that's what they ran on. They ran on the discretion being different, saying that we need to hold this person who is wealthy, who is powerful, who has been involved in our city for many, many decades, who has finances and hired people and been very deeply entrenched in our city for very long. We need to hold them account for the crimes they committed while in our city, where they either mistreated people or did something wrong to people. That's up to their discretion. And so if I'm going to say that this person did this for primarily political reasons to get Trump out of the ticket, I need to be able to say that the interpretation of them holding criminals to account is not a credible interpretation of their motives, and their primary motive was just to discredit Donald Trump as a political nominee, which I don't think there's any evidence to show that as of right now.
A core tenet of the American legal system is that, and this is going to sound almost condescending because I'm sure you already know it, as does most people watching, is that you're innocent until proven guilty, right? So a prosecutor is in a unique position in American society. What they say and do carries more weight than the average person in society because they are able to wield the punitive arm of the law against their fellow citizens. So if their calculation or how they sort of understand their actions are to say preemptively that this person is a criminal and therefore needs to be held to account, then they're doing away with the establishment of a burden of proof and just saying that there's a supposition that exists that somebody is guilty of criminal wrongdoing and therefore that should be the reason to investigate them. So that's kind of they're converting the process.
The investigation was already happening, though. There may have not been moved on it, but it wasn't like this didn't exist.
And also, one other thing I want to say, and then we should move on because we don't want to get bogged down. Yeah. One last thing on this. I think it's a bit of a misnomer, or it wouldn't exactly be the point to say, oh, this prosecution lacks merit because it's, quote, political or it's politically motivated. As I mentioned before, the office itself is inherently political. You have to be a politician to enter the office. You have to campaign and win votes and do everything that an ordinary politician does for any other office in terms of politicking. So to say, oh, the prosecution is politically motivated, it's like saying, you know, the politician is politically motivated. Yeah, he's a politician. That's what the thing is. Okay. The question is, do the political dimensions of when, where, and why this particular line of prosecutorial inquiry was sought cast enough doubt on its veracity or of its defensibility that it potentially sort of undermines the credibility of the entire sort of endeavor. That's the real question, not whether it was just quote political, because everything a prosecutor does is in a sense political because they're political actors and that's how they got into their position in the first place.
Okay, I guess like what I mean is not supposed to be politically partisan, as in I'm going to use my political position as the DA, because it is political to some extent, in order to help myself in a partisan way, to go after my political opponents, to go after those I politically disagree with, to go after people maybe I just have a grudge with, maybe a neighbor who littered in my yard, I'm gonna, I don't know, have their kids taken away, whatever that is. That is what they're not supposed to do. Of course, like there's politics in everything, but there's a type of politics that is acceptable, like running for the seat itself, and there's a type of politics that isn't acceptable, witch hunts against your political opponents. And so that's why I'm asking for evidence that this is a witch hunt, where you're just saying, well, it could be. And I'm like, well, of course, anything could be a witch hunt when there's an investigation opened into any politician ever. There needs to be evidence, though, brought forward that it's a witch hunt, because you're saying the assumption of criminality is the problem here. And what I am saying is that if you see a crime committed in public, if I saw you, Michael, go out and kick a baby, terrible thing. You would never do that, Michael. But let's say you just like, that baby has been crying on this plane too long. You go up and you kick it. And the prosecutor doesn't go after you for whatever reason, either because you're influential, wealthy. It could be any number of reasons. Maybe you get paid him off. Who knows? Me running and saying, I want to hold Michael Tracey to account for kicking that adorable Taiwanese baby. They're Taiwanese. So you're going to really piss off Adam Kissinger. You're really going to piss off me. That isn't politically motivated. I'm not going after you because you disagree with me. I'm going after you because you obviously committed a crime, and I have different discretion than the other person. We can wrap it up there.
Right, but you wouldn't have to run on prosecuting me for kicking the baby, because that's such an obvious crime that who's ever in office at the time that I do it would presumably see fit to prosecute me. Therefore, you wouldn't have to run to.
True, and I think there's a lot of examples of Donald Trump committing obvious crime. This, to me, is a pretty obvious crime. The question is how bad the crime is. Is it just a misdemeanor, or did it go?
Well, it wasn't
further?
an obvious crime to the federal authorities who investigated it. It wasn't an obvious crime to the Federal Election Committee. It's apparently obvious to Alvin Bragg, or would be if he ends up putting forth an indictment. We don't know.
So let's move on.
This
because
is 5 years after the fact.
This is supposed to take
the facts arose in 2018.
This has been supposed to be last 10 minutes. We're almost at 9:50. Okay, let's move on. Let's move on to the next topic. So I wanted to talk to you about a few things. People brought up things after our last conversation that they wanted me to talk to you about, but we didn't get to talk about.